All right. So again, welcome everybody. Thanks for dialing in. Hopefully we'll get a few more attendees. Some helpful information for this Zoom. Initially, everyone's muted, and we'll get through the core content here. We're recording the session and we'll post it on YouTube afterwards. Make sure your audio and video permissions are enabled for Zoom. On the participants menu will allow you to raise your hand, and so we may call for seconding a motion or something like that. When we do have any voting, a button basically will appear for you to vote, and you can ask questions at the end by just raising your hand. At that point, we'll all be on the screen, or you can just enter in the chat, and we'll pick it up there. The participants will be unmuted at that time. So to get things started, I want to hand things off to Sandy Tierney, who is the current board chair of US Squash and has served on the board since 2017, I believe, although I'm not entirely sure, and has been involved in a number of committees. So Sandy, I'll hand it off to you to kick off the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and welcome everyone. I'll call the annual meeting of members of US Squash to order, and wanted to start off by thanking all of you as members for participating not only in this meeting but in our sport, and wanted to particularly mention the other constituents in our organization, from players at all levels, from juniors to professionals, coaches, teaching professionals, college players, all of whom make up our community. I wanted to especially mention our Team USA athletes, and as many of you know, we've made incredible strides, particularly on the women's side, in competitive professional squash, with our Team USA women finishing second in the World Team Championships this past year, and having 4 players in the top 20, which is really unprecedented, and a testament to the training and coaching and resources that US Squash is bringing to bear. And I fully expect that on the men's side, we will start seeing similar progress over the coming years as a result of that. Finally, I wanted to mention and probably most importantly, applaud the US Squash staff. This pandemic was particularly difficult for our sport, basically shutting down almost all of our competitions and activities. And we were in the middle of delivering a $40 million facility as COVID hit, and Kevin and his team have done an exceptional job of navigating through what could easily have been a disastrous situation. It presented significant challenges for our organization, but we are, with Kevin's and his team's guidance, we've navigated our way through that. At any rate, just quickly, I wanted to review the agenda for today's meeting. We will be electing a director. We'll receive a management report from Kevin on the state of the organization. We'll then adjourn the formal part of the meeting and go into a question and answer period where any and all of you can ask questions, raise issues, and basically have a discussion with. We anticipate ending the meeting no later than 7 p.m. So, but basically we'll get the business of the annual meeting out of the way, and then have an opportunity to talk. So let's move on to the election. Kevin, do you want me to manage this, or do you?
I can give the overview. Some people may have already voted online via proxy. So those of you who have already voted, we would just ask you to not vote here. We will reconcile the votes from online voting and through this poll, so people won't ultimately be voting twice. However, the one nominee is a renomination of Andrew Fink. We've posted his information and circulated via email a few times. So hopefully people are familiar with Andrew, and he's done great work for US Squash over the last 4 years. He's co-chaired the finance committee, and he's been very involved in all aspects of the board process. So Sandy, I think if you just call for a motion, we'll ask somebody to under reactions show a hand for a second, and then we can offer up the poll to the members.
Do we have a motion to elect Andrew Fink renominated to Class 4 nominee for the board?
So if anyone wants to put up a reaction, and Dent is behind the scenes tracking these things. All right.
Kevin, I have a hand raised from William Hubbard, I believe. Yep, as our second.
And do we have a second? Thank
Okay,
you.
we have a second from Kevin Luzak.
Thank you.
Right, thanks, Kevin.
So we'll ask all those in favor.
So Dent, I think Dent is going to toss up a poll, and this is how we end up tracking and avoid duplicates. So in order to respond to the poll, hopefully it's popping up right in front
everyone
of you.
should have the poll. Everyone should have the poll in front of them now, Kevin. Some answers are coming in as we speak.
Okay. Give people another 15 seconds. We're of 4, so give people another minute. Okay, well, I guess we'll come close to ending the poll because, again, hopefully it's right in front of you.
There we go. We're getting there.
All right. Apparently, people are as fast on Zoom as I am.
Give it another 10 seconds or so, and then we can close it.
All right. Well, the good news is we have more people participating in the annual meeting than the first annual meeting I was part of back in 2005. Not exactly a huge turnout, but for those of you here who voted and participated, appreciate it. Dan, I'm going to close this now, if that's all right. And
yep, it should be closed now, Kevin, and we have 4 for, 1 against, and 1 abstention.
Right, and so 94 out of 144 in favor of Andrew Fink. So barring any massive complication, looks like Andrew Fink is being reelected to the board. On to the management report. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this last year and a little bit more about where things are moving forward. What you see here is, and I can actually, if I want to just move this a little bit so that, there we go, we can see the full screen. So FY24, US Squash is on a July 1 to June 30 fiscal year. So we're in the last 2 weeks of our fiscal year. And so we tend to look at things and on purpose, it also mirrors our season, essentially. Our busiest time effectively is sort of the eight months between September and April, and then May through August tends to be a bit of a different period of time in terms of planning. Also a lot of high performance activity, particularly on the junior side of things. So, but just a high level from our performance perspective, and we'll talk a little bit about the finances, is we did, as Sandy mentioned, finally get back to sort of normalized post-COVID activity. The most work there was related to the juniors and getting the rankings and point structure back to where we had been pre-COVID. We launched a program called Coach Pass, which brings together all the elements of our certifications and requirements to be a recognized coach by US Squash. That includes Safe Sport, that includes coach certification, that includes tournament director training, that includes CPR and other elements. Now we're beginning to offer continued education for those Coach Pass members. We launched Play LA program, which is an outdoor squash program in conjunction with the LA Parks and Recreation Department. We completed the College Squash Association merger, effectively bring the two organizations very close in collaboration. They're a separate entity. However, operationally, we work very closely together and have really 100% alignment in our goals. From a team's perspective, Sandy mentioned second place for the women's at the Worlds, which is really just sort of the signature accomplishment of the year. Two juniors won their divisions in the British Junior Open, and our juniors went further in the draws, and more of them went further in the draws than ever before. Pan Am Fed Cup just finished the other week. The women came in first, the men came in third, good enough to qualify for the Pan American Games, the quadrennial games that's supported by the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee that will take place in Santiago later this year. We launched at the Specter Center the first urban public school league with the Department of Education in Philadelphia, which is a success. We had 6 schools participating. It was a huge success, and we're looking forward to adding middle schools next year. We launched a partnership with Girls Inc. in Philadelphia, where we bring dozens of girls and their families through the center, introduce them to squash, and provide some continuity and experience in the sport if they're interested. From a governance point of view, not too much has changed other than the board did officially reduce the minimum number of committee members for our standing committees to 3 from 5 as the board begins to contract down in size, and that's just easier to manage, a little bit more efficient. And from a financials point of view, I have a couple slides on that. Our membership revenue increased in large part due to our dues increase. However, this is nearly 20% of our budget at this point. So, and it's a significant number, 1.68 million. We increased the number of annual fund donors by 35%. We have 350 supporters, which is fantastic. We're looking to, as we get more serious about rallying people around the organization and our mission to boost that number. And finally, we reduced the operating gap from 3.62 million to 2.66. So if you look at the next slide here, essentially the operating gap as we define it is basically before fundraising, how much do our expenses exceed our earned revenue. And as you'll see, there was a massive impact of COVID, clearly. And then the bounce back in expenses was related to the double whammy of then opening the Specter Center. So what we've done over the last few years is reducing our expenses. So we're looking at FY23 here. FY24 is the budgeted year, and therefore the gap is reducing to about $2 million. And so that $2 million is effectively what we need to raise. And so if you look at it as a percent of earned revenue, Obviously, this is the trend. You want to see us getting back into, the 30% range, which is more sustainable for a larger operation. Looking ahead, we're projected to have a decent gap this fiscal year, again, as we sort of come out of COVID and come out of the expenses related to opening the center. What we expect in fiscal year 24 budget, which is not yet approved, anticipate getting that approved by the board in July, is some increases in revenue from Club Locker and contributions, slight decreases in expenses by controlling payroll, and as I mentioned, bringing us to about $2 million operating gap, which is about 25%. So really, where are we going? I think it's important to note that, among all the organizations out there promoting squash and driving activity, U.S. Squash is really the only one that impacts every level of the sport. And our main investments over the last decade or so have been in technology and Club Locker primarily, and the Specter Center. And that foundation now, post-COVID, is having the Specter Center is essential. And that allows us now to shift to proactive efforts and actually driving long-term growth. I think we've done a successful job of supporting growth up to this point. There's certain areas where we haven't been as successful, and we'll focus on those. But in general, driving growth is at the center of what we'll be focused on, and it's good for everybody. It's good for adults, juniors, good for teaching pros in the facilities, schools, universities, our athletes, and communities in general. So that's where our focus is going to be. And when you talk about a strong foundation, when you think about the Specter Center and just the national programming that occurs there, you see just a packed schedule. So everything in black essentially happens at the Specter Center. And what that means is we're not traveling all over the country and up and down the East Coast trying to support these events at different venues and adapting to that venue. So we provide a consistently high experience, high quality experience at a lower cost. So that's been essential to our ability now to begin to shape our focus towards developing the sport at all levels and nationwide. So while the Specter Center is in Philadelphia, it really is the springboard for national programming. And when we think about programmatic areas, these are generally the ones that we think about. We think about access and awareness. So access is courts. How many are public, and are we promoting them? Junior squash, clearly a growth engine. More kids playing, more kids going into scholastic squash, post-college, and on as adults, and bringing their families into the sport. Champions, supporting our high performance pipeline is an important part of our mission and our membership of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and a focus on parity, getting participation of women and girls to be even with boys and men. We're making progress. However, until we're really essentially equal 50-50, this is going to continue to be an elevated area of focus and investment on our part. For fiscal year 24, we can't do everything all at once, but with solid technology, with the Specter Center as a foundation, these top two things, really focusing on supporting pros and coaches and recruiting more into the sport, particularly women, is an area of focus. Providing the continued education modules that I mentioned before as part of Coach Pass, and in specific areas such as how to more effectively engage women and girls in programming, or how to start up and support scholastic squash programs at middle and high schools. These are things that we want to support and educate the community, in particular pros and coaches, in how to do that. We'll begin probably in the latter part of the fiscal year, more active recruiting programs of coaches and basically activity directors through internships and placements. And we'll be promoting USR, which is the Universal Squash Rating, which is really sort of the entry level competitions for kids. We also need places to play. So we need the people to drive the programming. We need places to play. So in the short term, we really want to encourage both volunteers, districts, and coaches to help start middle and high school programs. We've seen some success, obviously, here in Philadelphia, but in other cities in the suburbs of Boston, for example. So providing education guidance, best practices is important. With the Play LA pilot program going on with Parks and Rec, doing prototypes of outdoor squash courts. You've probably heard of some of that type of activity from organizations like the PSA Foundation. So partnering with those organizations to figure out how to get low cost but reliable equipment outdoors, particularly in areas of the country where it's appropriate from a climate perspective. And then finally, continue to offer incentives to optimize the use of racquetball courts, converting them to squash if they're underutilized, and it's still an opportunity for the sport there. So boosting our numbers in terms of publicly accessible courts with the personnel in place. Overall, from a marketing and PR perspective, this is an area of focus of ours, and just improving generally how much publicity we're getting for the sport. We're working with a PR firm supporting us on a pro bono basis, which is fantastic. So I think we'll begin to see results there. Just promoting U.S. squash in general, shaping people's perceptions of the work that we do so that they're understanding of our mission and the programs that we operate. Promoting the Specter Center to, I talked about the national programs, but there's a lot of local programming that goes on in service to the community, but also just general membership utilization. So making Specter Center a real place in people's minds in Philadelphia. And then CSA at 100 is something that some of you may have heard of. This is the 100th anniversary of college squash competition. So all season for this year, that will be promoted by the CSA, by US Squash, culminating in a March 2nd event at the Specter Center at Collegiate Nationals. And then finally, a focus on really the culture of the game and the actual game itself. Focus on the conduct, on officiating, on adult squash. So first masters squash, doubles, women's squash, and starting with participation in nationals and making sure that we have really robust participation. And we have really active, I think, collaboration among the doubles, the women, and the masters now. There was a kickoff call a couple weeks ago. And so we're going to measure ourselves by, hey, do we have really robust nationals participation? And then we'll build from there. So I'm thankful to those committees. Just generally safety, safe sport, defibrillators at facilities, injury prevention, things like that. And then finally, sportsmanship and character. That committee is up and running, and is a nice balance to a lot of the disciplinary actions that we've been taking. So I wanted to provide a little more detail on that front. So again, we've got a strong foundation. The organization is stabilizing post-COVID, post-Specter Center build and opening. Now we need more pros and coaches, more women in those roles, encouraging more women and girls, adult squash play, and also just more public access to the sport and promoting the sport more. But in terms of the sport itself, we want to be sure that we're communicating clear expectations of the behavior of coaches, parents, and of course the players. And it's covered in the rules generally, which players can't behave in a manner that's unfair, dangerous, abusive, offensive, or in any way detrimental to the sport. And so what we will likely be messaging and enforcing is essentially an automatic escalation and enforcement of the rules, which is, should these things happen, then there's a conduct stroke, happens again, conduct game, happens again, conduct match. And just being really clear, because if players are throwing their rackets, or if they're engaging with officials, or they're just celebrating excessively, particularly in an offensive way to their opponent, those are breaking the rules, and we have ways within the rules to address those things. So it's one, being really clear on that, two, having automatic enforcement, and then of course the education. So we had pre-COVID implemented junior officiating clinics. We will be re-rolling those out, so encouraging teaching pros to offer those up. There'll be an online version, of course, as well, and there's online training as well. So, and then finally, just having more eyes and ears out there in the community. We can't be everywhere all the time. We have instituted incident reports, which we've had for years. We now have one where people can report positive sportsmanship, and just engaging our districts and local committees to help us monitor who's doing well, who needs more support out there in the community. So in terms of who's doing this, this is the leadership team. Nick Kakaiko is our VP of Advancement. James Nieder is our GM at the Specter Center, and is also drives the HR department for about a 30-person organization. Ned Edwards, Chief of Sport Development, has had a large role in the Specter Center as well as in fundraising, all of which help drive growth. Kim Clerkin, Chief Programs Officer, she oversees effectively all of our programs nationally, including teams, events, other programs, certifications, etc. Linda Berkman's our Chief Financial Officer, and Ryan Rayfield, our CTO, who oversees Club Locker development. And so who you don't see here and who you don't see on the screen, sadly, is Dent Wilkins, who is facilitating this meeting on the back end, and he'll be appearing on screen later, and he can ask him what he's moving on to. But he's served the organization exceptionally well for 15 years. So we're really excited for what he's going to next. However, obviously, it's bittersweet in terms of his departing the organization, and certainly the impact he's had on the sport over the last 15 years has been monumental. So that's the leadership team, and what I'm looking forward to: ton of activity at the Specter Center, a ton of junior activity, World Juniors, Pan Am Juniors, under 23 activity at the center, Battle of the Border, where we host Squash Canada and their athletes, a ton of community programs. So kicking into our second full year at the Specter Center feels really good. The US Open coming up in the fall, we're in good shape there. Tickets will go on sale soon. Pan Am Games, I mentioned the quadrennial games in Santiago, which is really an important marker for US squash to demonstrate to the US OPC, how well we perform. We'll be expanding some programs. I mentioned locally the middle school program at the Specter Center, more venues in the Play LA program, more outdoor parks. We'll expand the junior girls league partnership and potentially offer it to other markets as well. And then finally, as I mentioned, the CSA at 100 celebration March 2nd. So, that's the briefing. I'm sure people have questions and thoughts. But Sandy, that's my 2023 management report, and I think that's concludes the official part of the annual meeting before we get to the Q&A.
Thank you, Kevin. Much appreciated. That was quite comprehensive, and I'm sure would be the subject for further discussion as we go into the question and answer period. But now's the time to officially conclude the annual meeting of the members of UF Squash, and I'd ask for a motion to adjourn to the official part of the meeting. Don't all jump up at once. Thank you, Bill. Do we have a second?
Yeah, we have a second from Beth Brazen as well.
Thank you, Beth. With the move and second, do we have all those in favor of adjourning the meeting?
We'll just launch the poll now, Sandy, so people can vote on the poll, which should show up on everyone's screen now as well. All right, I do believe we have a positive vote to adjourn.
Right. Thank
So
you very much.
There was one question about quorum for this meeting, which I think is a good question. Is there a quorum? The bylaws essentially say for it to be an official annual meeting of the members, there needs to be 25 members present, and but a smaller group can meet from time to time in the meantime. From an official business point of view, the members essentially, the only official business is to elect the director that was nominated by the board. Because we have so many proxy votes, that official business officially gets concluded. But from a technical perspective, is this an official annual meeting of the members? Probably not. It's a bit of a gray area. But I think from an operational point of view, since we're following all of our procedures and policies and putting the word out in advance and promoting it, let's just say it's an area for improvement in terms of getting people, to this meeting and be part of the discussion and be engaged more. So it's a good question. Maybe people are burned out on Zoom. I don't know, or maybe we find another forum at which to do the annual meeting.
Kevin, I want to give a chance to William Hubbard, who I believe was raising his hand for a question earlier. Is that correct, William? I'll unmute you here.
I didn't have a question. Can you hear me? Yeah. No,
We
I
can.
cut the end of my finger, so I've got to hold it up in the air. So, and I also have to get off in a couple of minutes. But I
All right, well,
enjoyed
thank you
this
for joining.
session.
Yes, thank you for joining.
Hopefully it doesn't affect your squash game.
I'm left-handed.
Oh, perfect.
We noticed.
All right, we have a question from Beth Raisin, I believe, Kevin.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, Beth.
Actually, a few questions. I'll start. First of all, I was the one who asked about the annual meeting, and if the requirement is you need at least 25 members for an annual meeting, that has been satisfied in terms of the proxies counting as attendance for the annual meeting. So technically, it is an annual meeting. But along those lines, I think one area that I just would like to point out that I think needs significant work is communications. The communications for this annual meeting, I would say, were not very effective. I actually was not aware of it until a friend of mine in Canada sent me an email saying, she goes, I don't know why I got this, but do you know this person that's up for election? And I didn't receive any kind of notification of the annual meeting until today. So I would say that I think there's a lot of work to be done on the communications front. I don't think it's that people are zoomed out. I think people just truly were not aware of it. And so I leave it back to you. I do have a number of questions regarding the financials of the organization. I am interested to know, in terms of, first of all, the Specter Center, has that project been fully paid, or is the organization still needing to raise money to pay for the completion of the Specter Center?
Do you want, so the answer to that question is enough funds have been raised to pay for the entire construction project. So any funds being raised for the organization in general help support our programming, our staff, our capacity.
So it costs 40 million to construct and you raised 40 million. Okay, and all bills have been paid in full. All right, because somewhere in the grapevine there was some information floating about that there was still debt owing on it.
Well, there is debt on the project still. So when we raise money, we have pledges against the entire amount. We had a construction bridge loan. We had some other financing in place. So as those pledges are paid, then we pay down the debt. But we have commitments for above the construction amount.
And how much is outstanding on the construction loan?
There's $500,000 on the bridge loan, which will be paid down by the end of this year. And then there's probably another $1.5 million in other financing.
Okay. Second question on the financial side is, I think a lot of people were led to believe that when the Specter Center was built, it would be self-sufficient in terms of generating revenue. Is that the case, or is there an operating deficit associated with the Specter Center currently? And if so, how much is that?
I'm not sure who was leading people to believe that it would be self-sustaining, certainly not out of the gate and certainly not post-COVID. However, I think long-term, we do hope that the Specter Center essentially will operate in the black on its own. That said, part of the long-term strategy related to the Specter Center is that there's a lot of cost savings to a lot of our programming as a consequence of having the center. So we have some building out to do in terms of local foundation support, corporate support, building up the membership. Currently, there's about $1 million operating gap for the center, but that doesn't sort of officially account for a lot of the sort of internal transfers of, certain events and organizations, paying for the use of the courts, et cetera. So, but it's about $1 million to go in terms of closing the gap.
So currently, the Specter Center's operating costs exceed the revenue generated specifically in connection with the Specter Center. And I assume, though, that there's an allocation of internal costs for things that are run at the Specter Center, so that that's included in that calculation.
It's not, no.
Okay.
It's just on a direct basis. Yeah.
Okay, so it's $1 million. And
well, and remember, Beth, for example, we had office space in New York that we were paying rent on.
I understand.
You know,
I understand.
So there were some other financial considerations.
No, I understand. But at the end of the day, it's net, right? Yep. So might have gotten rid of office costs in New York, but if the cost of operating the Specter Center far outweigh what those savings are, yep, there's a net deficit. No, I don't, right? A question that I've had for a while is, so does the US Squash have a lease with respect to the Specter Center for its operations? How does that work? Or are we granted a license to use that facility from Drexel? Are we paying an annual lease fee for the facility? We have
a very long-term lease, effectively from Drexel, who has leased it from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which those lease agreements extend out more than 70 years.
Okay. So $1 million of the 2.6 million that is the current operating deficit is attributable to the Specter Center. And then there's another approximately 1.6 or 1.5 million in an operating deficit. Is that right?
Broad strokes, yeah. For this fiscal year, yeah.
Okay. It seems pretty significant. What before the Specter Center?
Beth, I think you have to keep in mind that many not-for-profit organizations have to rely on philanthropy in order to make ends meet on an annual basis, and so our focus.
Sandy, I know that only all too well. I ran a nonprofit for 10 years. I built it out from the ground up. But there is an element of a member association, which is a little bit different than a services nonprofit like Street Squash that doesn't really have any way to generate revenue, whereas a member association like US Squash has areas in which revenues can be generated, and also in which a tight eye has to be kept on costs and all those kinds of things. I ask these questions because I think transparency for both a nonprofit and a member organization, especially one in which you would like your members to go above and beyond membership dues to support the organization, are quite significant. And I'm trying to get this information because I will let you know, and I sort of connect with a lot of people in the squash world, that right now, particularly in the adult squash community, there are any number of people who aren't feeling positive about donating to US Squash. And I think that's important for you all to know. And I think that transparency about these issues is significant. And And so that's why I ask those questions, so that I can be informed when I think about it. But I just think, you know, $1.5 million in an operating deficit above and beyond the Specter Center is not a small piece of change. What's the overall operating budget?
So Beth, a couple things, and then I want to make sure other people
Yep.
have an opportunity to ask questions. But it might be helpful to know that all of our audits and 990s are online. So if you go to about US Washington
I
government,
understand that. I've
then-
looked at the audits in 990s. The 990s, and I filled them out myself, give us minimal information with respect to the operations of the organization. There are overall categories which are identified, but if someone really wants to understand how the piece of the pie is divvied up and where costs are being allocated, the 990 is not going to provide that information.
The audit reports are also online, and those include full financial statements. But in general, Beth, I appreciate the fact that they're a core group of adult players who don't feel like we're sort of meeting their expectations from that front, and hopefully the comments that I shared in the management report reflect that we've heard that, and that's an area of focus of ours. From a financial management point of view, essentially we're getting the Specter Center up and running. That'll take several years. As Sandy pointed out, there are equal or greater cost savings as a consequence of having the center itself. And then the final question is, what can we do, or how can we make investments that actually earn more revenue than it takes to earn it in spending? We also have, remember, dramatically expanded our support for our high performance program over the last decade. So that investment's gone from, let's say, roughly $70,000 to $100,000 to close to $1 million. And so to a large degree, when we're raising money to sort of to make the organization whole each year, the majority of that support really is going directly into our high performance programs. So that's part of this mix as well, and we think that's a priority. It's our shop window. We want to perform well on the international stage. We want to be positioned for future opportunities. So, but we hear you, and look, we're the most critical of ourselves, right? And so, we don't have to present numbers that say, here's an operating gap. We could easily flip it around and say, look, we're earning 75% of what we need to, and we only have to raise 25%. So, I hear you from a membership perspective, but we've definitely, membership's a portion of what we do and support, but we're a broader organization even than that.
Right, and one things I would address, that's I think also something that for people who have been longtime members, and people don't know me, I've been involved with squash for 40 years, and I was on the board of directors of US Squash for something like 10 or 15 years. But one of the questions is raising that much money for the high performance program. What's the return on investment, and what's the cost in terms of grassroots development? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, if we don't grow the sport at the grassroots, it's all for naught, right? Mm-hmm. It's just not going to happen. And the grassroots development, I think, is an area that needs a lot of attention and focus, and needs some new ideas and some new leadership to really identify how to address it. And particularly, yes, I heard you talk about utilizing volunteers and within squash, and I know any number of people, including myself, who have volunteered our time to introduce people to the game and bring them in and all that stuff. But I think it's an area where US Squash needs to focus a little bit more concretely and really hear what people outside of the employee team are saying, and think about how to incorporate that into a more effective grassroots development program.
Thanks, Beth.
For now.
Thank you. Happy to follow up. And someone in the chat has suggested just some more straightforward pie charts and we can work on presenting our financials in a more digestible way. Certainly the way the organization's run, we're proud of, and we think we're doing it effectively. But if perceptions are otherwise, obviously there's work to do on that front. So thanks. I'm wondering if others have any questions based on the presentation.
I have a question from Ollie here.
Hey, I don't have a question. First of all, let me introduce myself. That's first time attending this meeting. My name is Ali, as I said, and I'm the national director of Lifetime Squash. Lifetime has got 160 plus clubs across the country and Canada, out of which 40 plus are squash clubs. Out of these 40 plus clubs, there's only one in Canada, in Mississauga, and all other clubs are in the US. I just want to give a big credit to Kevin and his team for everything they've been doing over the past few years that I've been working with you guys. It's been amazing the way squash has been improving in this country from any perspective that you look at it. Whether you look at from the participation to revenue for the clubs that are commercial like us, and to your programs that are at the very end of the other range of, your programs are like SEA, more, oriented towards less advantaged people and kids. So big kudos, well done to you all. Just wanted to bring this up. And something that I wanted to bring up in here is, as we could see, the huge decline in the squash participation across the world. US squash is improving. That is what we want to see as an organization that we could see in the US. So we got to be appreciative of what we have. Everybody helps in any capacity that is possible to this organization to do better. Your new team has been doing a better job, Kevin. We work more with Kim, and she's been amazing. She's patient, she's attentive, she's caring. And I would like to get to know other board members and other people. I knew you before I came to the US from Iran, from the time that I was the vice president of the federation. So I knew you for a long time. I think this has been a very great, consistent job over the years, that it is what it is today, and a destination for all these top pros from across the world who wanting to be in this market. That's just an indication of how well US Squash has been doing. And as a Lifetime, I just want to let you know, we are beside US Squash in whatever you guys decide and whatever your policies are to help grow our sports. Especially nowadays, is become way more important for our unity, for us to be aligned and consistent, to put our energies in the same directions. With these new racket sports coming to the field, like pickleball, like padel, I'm really glad that our court sizes are not compatible with theirs. Otherwise, they would have hurt us like the way they're hurting tennis. But I still see this as a threat to our sports, that we need to just be more proactive than reactive. At this time, probably people will not, kids, let's say, see no future for them to play at pickleball. But if they make it meaningful, this could be a huge change in the industry. So I'm glad that I met you guys today. Again, thank you so much for all you do on your team. It was a pleasure meeting you today.
Thank you, Ali. Appreciate
My pleasure.
it.
No
Look
problem.
forward to keeping in touch. And thanks to Lifetime for its massive support of the sport. There's another question in the chat. How many members does your squash have, and how many are adults? How many are juniors? It's 11,500 approximately, and it's about 70-30 adults to juniors. Any other questions from the group? Andrew Strasvogel. Let's try and get him off mute. Hey,
Yeah, I
Andrew.
posted a question in chat. It was fun watching the occasional squash match on the tennis channel, usually at 2 a.m, but it was refreshing. Lately, I was browsing around the ESPN channels, and there's bloody pickleball, which is pretty lame, but they're generating a lot of enthusiasm about it. Is our new PR lead going to try and get more like generalized exposure to squash through like the tennis channel or through media outlets like the Washington Post when we have a huge tournament? Throw the names out there because they cover a lot of smaller sports, but I don't think I've seen squash, especially since some of our women players are right at the top now. They might want to pick up on that. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think from really kind of two different buckets. I think from a PR perspective, you'll see an uptick in coverage of squash just generally in the US. From a, let's call it a shop window perspective, the broadcast, the streaming and distribution of that content of the pros. My guess is most people are aware of the Walter Group investing in the PSA, the global tour. They bring a lot of experience from other major sports, and as well as connections and contacts. So I think that's a big part of the PSA's thought process in terms of partnering and gaining outside investors to see how they can move the needle. I would say, and maybe Alex Goff will take a look at this, but I've mentioned it before that we do believe the U.S. is an underutilized market from that perspective. We don't take the lead on that as U.S. Squash. We have the U.S. Open, of course. We obviously support our athletes and want to compete well internationally in the world rankings. We may try and take a more proactive role there, but as has been pointed out, making sure we're supporting the grassroots, making sure we're developing and supporting adult squash, that is sort of our next focus. If we can get to it, working on more of the broadcast angle and the entertainment angle and getting more mainstream awareness of the sport, obviously is where we want to be. It's just a question of how long it'll take to get there. And we're also hoping the PSA will knock it out of the park too. They've been great partners to us, and obviously the U.S. is a big part of the tour, about 30%. Question about membership. What are we doing to increase membership? It's a good question. We did it's a good question. I think on the slide set, there were two strategic sort of considerations for the organization. One in the area of positioning. So the idea of launching a U.S. Squash Foundation, and that's something that the board has approved, and that will likely roll out this year. And the reason for that is essentially that helps really clarify the purpose of U.S. Squash, in which is to drive growth and excellence. And from an operating perspective and a governance perspective, there's certain things that need to be done. But from a messaging and from a community outreach perspective, it might be easier to do that through a foundation. Every governing body out there pretty much has one, and it's been quite successful. So that's one. The other, though, is probably more related to the membership question, which is how do we grow membership? Really, how do we grow engagement? And part of that is the technology and making ourselves relevant to the everyday player. Part of it's simply just driving growth, and I think we're recovering from COVID. Adult squash has not quite gotten back to the same activity level. Even junior squash is basically there, but not probably quite. And for the core growth into the future, it's going to be about scholastic squash, middle and high school squash, and making sure that's available to public school kids. We also will be doing more aggressive marketing campaigns to encourage people to join U.S. Squash, and will likely, as part of the technology, provide more entry-level membership benefits. So we've been building that out in the Club Locker system. So pretty much at this point, it's you pay the full rate or nothing, and you get all the benefits or none. And so being thoughtful in terms of what we want to offer to try and pull people in closer to the organization is what we're thinking through right now. And then lastly, we do have several thousand non-paid members in the context of College Squash Association and other partnerships that we have. So the number's a little bit higher, but I think we can all agree that those numbers can and should be higher. So thank you, everybody, for your questions and for joining the call and sharing your feedback. And we'll continue to improve and engage. And in most cases, hopefully, it'll be even in person. So have a great evening and a good summer if we don't see you.